From humble beginnings as one of the first movies of a new animation studio to a franchise reaching the furthest corners of the earth to the point that most have been clamoring for the longest time to just finally end it, there's no denying that the Ice Age series has had its fair share of highs and lows over the years, though mostly lows. And as I already detailed in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, a major reason for these lows is due to declining quality and inability to properly build off of what the first movie had established. But that being said, not everything related to the Ice Age series has been a disaster, with one of the more notable examples of that being its third installment, Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs. Because while not as good as the previous two installments, this movie actually managed to be a worthy addition to the franchise, to the point that many wish it had simply marked the end of it altogether, as it does make for a pretty effective send-off to all the characters. And today, while staying completely fair and objective, I'd like to go over why exactly Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs actually works as a continuation of the series when it honestly should have been their jump the shark moment. And needless to say, there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So if you've never seen it and don't want to know what happens, you really shouldn't proceed with this video. You have been warned. Okay, so this may go without saying, but on paper, the idea of the Ice Age characters stumbling upon a world of dinosaurs deep in the earth and having to fight their way back to the surface sounds absolutely ridiculous. Again, for all intents and purposes, this should have been the movie where the franchise lost its charm, but instead that only came around when they shoved Scrat in a UFO, which was too much even for a series like this. Though to be fair, the cracks were already starting to form in continental drift. But the point is, the idea behind this movie shouldn't have worked, but managed to beat the odds and proved itself to be a decent follow-up anyway. And the reason for this mainly comes down to a few different things. The first one of which being that such a premise isn't quite as outlandish as it might initially sound, because let's face it, due to pop culture not exactly having a good grasp on history and people having a notoriously hard time understanding the concept of lawn time, the idea of grouping together dinosaurs with animals from the Ice Age, as if to say that the former became extinct at the same time the latter was rising, came about long before this movie was released. So as I just said, to anybody in the know, it would seem completely absurd to even try and imply that dinosaurs survived for so long. But for general audiences, it's an idea they've already been long exposed to. And considering the previous two movies didn't have a problem playing rather fast and loose with how the Ice Age actually went, that only made the premise even easier to swallow, as it's not like it had been only adhering strictly to historical fact before then. But even beyond its general premise, the movie smartly doesn't rely on its gimmick to carry the whole story. In other words, the general plot may be about the herd encountering dinosaurs, yes, but it keeps the focus much more on the characters and the situations they find themselves in, rather than focus exclusively on the dinosaurs. Because in actuality, the film is about Sid freaking out at the prospect of the herd breaking up and trying to find a new purpose, only to get lost in the world of the dinos, and then the herd having to go in and find him before he gets himself killed. So as a result, not only do the dinosaurs have a somewhat natural reason to be a part of the story, but they also don't hijack the narrative either, as the focus remains strictly on the characters everybody knows and loves. Because on top of having to find Sid, the other most important plot point revolves around Ellie about to give birth, which only helps add a further sense to Manny's urgency to find Sid and get everybody out of their foreign environment alive as quickly as possible. Basically, the dinosaurs are there only to add to the plot, not be the plot in and of themselves. And speaking of that, this is also the only movie in the series to not make a particular mistake that I went on at length about in the aforementioned video, which is that it doesn't add a bunch of new characters that steal the spotlight away from the older ones. Really, Buck is the only new character of any prominence that's introduced, as Rudy, the mother dinosaur, and the three babies don't really get much characterization or screen time comparatively speaking. Instead, with the aforementioned exception of Buck, which most will agree was most definitely not a bad addition, the focus remains firmly on the characters everybody already knows and telling their stories, which was most definitely the right way to go about it and something that their sequels could have learned a bit more from. But speaking of Buck, that's another thing that helps this movie along. It nails the comedy. Seriously, this may just be the funniest entry in the entire series, as not only is Buck a complete show stealer, but most of the other jokes also land surprisingly well. But in addition to its humor, it's also got some of the heart that made the original Ice Age movie so good, which allows most of the emotional moments to land and allowed the audience to feel the full impact of them. Things like Sid genuinely being devastated at the thought that the only real family he's ever had would leave him, as well as his unsuccessful attempts to be a good parent to the three dinosaur babies, Manny's constant worry at losing another family, and his extreme determination to keep Ellie safe, or even Buck's sincere sadness at Rudy's death, as well as his delight when he realizes he's alive, are all things that have a surprising amount of emotional weight behind them, especially for those who've seen the previous two movies. Really, for perhaps the funniest installment in a series about a bunch of zany talking animals, it certainly knows how to deliver on the more dramatic side of things too. So the point here is, through a combination of decent writing, a gimmick that general audiences would be at least willing to go along with, and knowing what should and shouldn't be done regarding the characters, Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs is honestly a much better movie than it had any right to be. Again, it's certainly no masterpiece, and can't quite stack up compared to its previous installments, but none of that changes the fact that it honestly did make for a decent end to the original Ice Age trilogy and was probably the last objectively good movie in the series overall. And as I noted before, that's not bad for a movie with a premise as absurd as this one. But it just goes to show what I've said many times on this channel, that good writing is everything. When something is written well enough, it can take even the worst ideas and turn them into something worthwhile, which is exactly what happened in the case of Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs. Okay, that's everything I've got on that. Now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs actually managed to be a pretty good movie and addition to the Ice Age series despite the odds stacked against it? Or do you believe that it's a bad movie and that I'm giving it way too much credit? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below, because you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. You can feel about Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs any way that you'd like, and nobody can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.